trip to Disney theme parks is meant to relax and entertain, taking you out of your everyday life to be lost in a land of make-believe and thrills. But there's a fine line, however, between having a good time and witnessing or taking part in a horrific tragedy that could stick with you forever. Whether blatant disregard for safety protocols by the guests, or overlooked hazards by the park operators themselves, these are 10 deaths that occurred at Disney theme parks. May 1964. Mark Mabels, a 15-year-old Long Beach resident, was killed when he stood up on the Matterhorn bobsleds. Maples, or his companion, foolishly unbuckled his seatbelt and attempted to stand up as their bobsled neared the peak of the mountain. Maples lost his balance and was thrown from the sled to the track below, fracturing his skull and ribs and causing internal injuries. He died 3 days later. This was Disneyland's first fatality. June 1966. Thomas Guy Cleveland, a 19-year-old from Northridge, California, was killed when he attempted to sneak into Disneyland along the monorail track. Cleveland scaled the park's 16-foot-high outer fence on a grad night and climbed onto the monorail track, intending to jump or climb down once inside the park. Cleveland ignored the security guards' shouting protests and warnings of an approaching monorail train and failed to leap clear of the track. He finally climbed down onto the fiberglass canopy below the track, but the clearance wasn't enough, and the oncoming train struck and killed him, dragging his body 30 to 40 feet down the track. August 1967. Ricky Lee Yama, a 17-year-old Hawthorne resident, was killed when he disregarded safety instructions and exited his people mover as the ride was passing through a tunnel. Yama slipped as he was jumping from car to car and was crushed to death beneath the wheels of the oncoming cars. June 1973. Bogdan Della, an 18-year-old Brooklyn resident, drowned trying to swim across the rivers of America. Della and his 10-year-old brother managed to stay on Tom Sawyer Island past its dusk closing time by climbing the fence separating the island from the burning settlers' cabin. When they decided to leave the island a few hours later, they chose to swim across the river rather than call attention to their rule-breaking by appealing to cast members for help. Because the young brother didn't know how to swim, Della tried to carry him on his back as he swam to shore. Bogdan Della went down about halfway across the river. The young brother remained afloat by dog paddling until a ride operator hauled him onto a boat, but Bogdan was nowhere to be found. His body wasn't located by searchers until the next morning. June 7th, 1980. Geraldo Gonzalez, a recent San Diego high school graduate, was killed on a people mover in an accident much like the one that had befallen Ricky Lee Yama 13 years earlier. Gonzalez, in the early morning hours of a grad night celebration, was climbing from car to car as the people movers entered the high-speed tunnel adjacent to the former America Sings building. Gonzalez stumbled and fell onto the track, where an oncoming train of cars crushed him beneath its wheels and dragged his body a few hundred feet before being stopped by the ride operator. June 4th, 1983. Philip Strogan, an 18-year-old Albuquerque, New Mexico resident, was drowned in the rivers of America in yet another grad night incident. Strogan and a friend celebrating both their graduations and Strogan's 18th birthday had been drinking quite heavily that evening. They sneaked into a cast members only area along the river and untied an inflatable rubber maintenance motorboat, deciding to take it for a joyride around the river. Unable to adequately control the boat, they struck a rock near Tom Sawyer Island, and Strogan was thrown into the water. His friend traveled back to shore to seek help, but Strogan drowned long before the body was finally located an hour later. January 3rd, 1984. Dolly Reagan Young, a 48-year-old Fremont resident, was killed on the Matterhorn in an incident remarkably similar to the first Disneyland guest's death nearly 20 years earlier. About 2/3 of the way down the mountain, Young was thrown from her seat into a path of an oncoming bobsled, her head and chest becoming pinned between its wheels. An examination of Young's sled revealed that her seatbelt had not been fastened at the time of the accident, but because she was riding alone in the rear car of the sled, no one could determine whether or not she had deliberately unfastened her belt. December 24th, 1998. In a tragic Christmas Eve incident, one Disneyland cast member and 2 guests were injured, one fatally, when a rope used to secure the sailing ship Columbia as it docked on the rivers of America tore loose a metal cleat in which it was attached to. The cleat sailed through the air and struck the heads of 2 guests who were waiting to board the ship. Luann Phil Dawson, 33, of Duvall, Washington, and his wife, Liu Thieu Vong, 43. Dawson was declared brain dead and died 2 days later when his life support system was disconnected. September 5th, 2003. A 22-year-old man, Marcelo Torres, died after suffering severe blunt trauma and extensive internal bleeding in a derailment of Disneyland's Big Thunder Mountain Railroad roller coaster that also injured 10 other riders. The cause of the accident was determined to be improper maintenance. Marcelo's attorney confirmed the fatal injuries occurred when the first passenger car collided with the underside of the locomotive. The derailment was a result of poor maintenance procedure. Fasteners on the left side axle of the locomotive were not tightened and safe-tied as they should have been. As the train entered the tunnel, the axle came loose and jammed against the brake section, causing the locomotive to become airborne and hit the ceiling of the tunnel. The locomotive then fell on top of Marcelo, crushing him. The employee death. The Carousel of Progress had been shut down and its animatronic workings shipped to Florida's Walt Disney World in 1973. The Disneyland attraction was then revamped and redubbed on June 29, 1974 as America Sings. Like its predecessor, the attraction featured an outer ring of 6 seating areas which rotated around a stationary center housing multiple stages. On the evening of July 8, 1974, an 18-year-old woman from Santa Ana named Deborah Gale Stone was working the attraction as a hostess. Her job was to greet each new audience as they settled into the seating area. Standing on the left of the stage, she welcomed the guest over the microphone before the outer ring rotated and carried the audience to the first scene of the carousel. About 11 p.m. that evening, Stone approached too closely to the area between the rotating theater wall and the non-moving stage wall and was crushed to death between them. Ride operators were notified by a guest who heard Stone screaming from the adjacent theater.